Picture the cockpit. Two pilots in crisp uniforms, hands on the controls, eyes scanning the horizon, guiding 100 tons of metal through the sky with skill and precision. That image is burned into the popular imagination. It is in every movie, every airline advertisement, every child's dream of what it means to fly. It is also, for the vast majority of a modern commercial flight, almost completely wrong. The pilots are there. That part is true, but their hands are not on the controls. Not really. Not for most of the journey. And the reasons why reveal something extraordinary about the world you are moving through every time you board a plane. Here is what actually happens on a typical commercial flight today. The crew pushes back from the gate. They taxi to the runway under their own guidance. They advance the thrust levers for takeoff. And then, somewhere between 200 and 1,000 feet above the ground, usually within the first minute of flight, one of them reaches forward and engages a system called the autopilot. From that moment until somewhere in the final approach to landing, the autopilot flies the plane. Not assists, not helps, flies. The pilots monitor, they manage, they make decisions. But the physical act of keeping the aircraft on course, at altitude, at speed, through weather, through airspace, is handled by a computer system that has been running quietly in the background since before you boarded. This is not a secret. The aviation industry has never hidden it. But it is something that most passengers sitting back there with their orange juice and their noise-canceling headphones have never quite absorbed. The people at the front of the aircraft are not steering, they are supervising. And the question worth asking is not whether this is alarming. The question is how we got here, what it means, and what it tells you about the nature of human skill, human error, and the strange relationship between people and the machines they build to surpass them. The autopilot is not a new invention. The first working autopilot was built by Lawrence Sperry in 1914, barely a decade after the Wright brothers' first flight. Sperry demonstrated it over Paris in a stunt that reportedly left the watching crowd speechless. He stood up in the cockpit of his biplane, raised both hands above his head, and the aircraft continued flying straight and level. His mechanic climbed out onto the wing. The plane did not waver. The crowd, according to witnesses, did not know whether to applaud or run. That early system worked through gyroscopes. It sensed the orientation of the aircraft and made small corrections to keep it level and on course. It was mechanical. It was limited. It could hold an aircraft steady in calm conditions, but it could not navigate, could not respond to complex weather, could not manage the dozens of systems a modern aircraft requires. What exists in a modern commercial cockpit is something categorically different. It is not one system. It is a layered architecture of interconnected computers. The flight management system plans the entire route from gate to gate, calculating the most fuel-efficient path, accounting for winds, airspace restrictions, and aircraft weight. The autopilot follows that path with extraordinary precision, making thousands of tiny adjustments per second that no human hand could replicate. The autothrottle manages engine power, speeding up and slowing down automatically to maintain the correct speed at every phase of flight. The flight envelope protection system monitors the boundaries of what the aircraft can safely do and intervenes if those boundaries are approached. In some aircraft, it simply will not let you exceed them, no matter what you do with the controls. Aviation psychologist Earl Weiner at the University of Miami spent decades studying what happens to pilots in this environment. His research identified something he called the paradox of automation. The more reliable the automation becomes, the less opportunity pilots have to practice the manual skills that the automation is designed to replace. And the less they practice, the more they need the automation. The cycle feeds itself. You build a machine to handle the hard parts. The hard parts stop being practiced. The machine becomes indispensable not just because it is good, but because the humans have, through disuse, become less capable of doing without it. This is not a criticism. It is an observation about what expertise looks like in a highly automated environment. Modern airline pilots are deeply skilled, but their skill has shifted. They are no longer primarily stick and rudder aviators in the old sense. They are systems managers. They monitor data streams, interpret warnings, manage fuel loads, coordinate with air traffic control, anticipate weather, and make decisions under time pressure with incomplete information. These are extraordinarily complex cognitive tasks. They are just not the tasks that the word pilot calls to mind. The shift happened gradually, then suddenly. Early autopilot systems on commercial aircraft in the 1950s and 1960s could hold heading and altitude but required constant supervision and frequent manual corrections. By the 1970s, the introduction of inertial navigation systems meant that aircraft could navigate oceanic routes without ground-based radio beacons, following programmed Great Circle paths across thousands of miles of open water. The pilot still hand-flew significant portions of each flight. By the 1980s, the glass cockpit arrived. Analog dials gave way to digital displays. Flight management computers began integrating navigation, performance, and systems management into unified interfaces. Automation expanded rapidly. Hand flying became the exception rather than the rule. By the time the Airbus A320 entered service in 1988, the transition was essentially complete. The A320 introduced fly-by-wire technology to mainstream commercial aviation. In a traditional aircraft, the pilot's inputs on the control column are connected mechanically or hydraulically to the control surfaces. Pull back on the column, cables and rods physically move the elevator. In a fly-by-wire aircraft, there are no mechanical connections. The pilot moves a side stick or column. That input is converted to an electrical signal, and computers decide how to translate that signal into actual control surface movement. The computers always sit between the pilot and the aircraft. They interpret the pilot's intention and execute it within the limits of what is safe. The pilot does not directly command the aircraft. The pilot requests, and the computer decides whether and how to comply. This is the feature that most people, when they learn about it, find either deeply reassuring or mildly unsettling, depending on their temperament. The aircraft, in a real sense, cannot be flown into dangerous attitudes by the pilots. The envelope protection systems prevent it. If you pull hard enough back on the side stick of an Airbus, the aircraft will pitch up, but only to the maximum safe angle. It will not stall. The computers will not allow it. The same protection exists for bank angle, for overspeed, for excessive descent rate. The aircraft is, in a meaningful way, protecting itself from its own crew. Boeing took a different philosophical approach. In Boeing aircraft, fly-by-wire is present, but the philosophy emphasizes pilot authority. The computers provide feedback and warnings, but ultimately defer to the pilot's control inputs more directly. This difference in philosophy between the two dominant manufacturers is not just technical. It reflects a genuine disagreement about a deep question. When the human and the machine disagree about what should happen, who should win? That question moved from the theoretical to the urgently practical in 2009 when Air France Flight 447 disappeared over the South Atlantic. The aircraft, an Airbus A330, was in cruise at 35,000 feet when its airspeed sensors became blocked by ice crystals. The autopilot disconnected. The pilots, suddenly manual flying a wide-body jet in the middle of the night over the ocean, became confused about what the aircraft was doing. In a series of inputs that accident investigators and aviation psychologists have analyzed exhaustively since, the co-pilot who had taken the controls pulled back on the side stick repeatedly, pitching the nose up, stalling the aircraft. The aircraft fell for 3 minutes and 30 seconds before it hit the water. All 228 people on board were killed. The investigation revealed not a failure of technology, but a failure of the interaction between humans and technology. The pilots were qualified. The aircraft was functioning. But the sudden removal of automation in a high-stress environment, combined with unusual instrument readings and poor communication in the cockpit, produced a catastrophic loss of situational awareness. They did not know what the aircraft was doing. And because they spent so little of their flying time manual flying large aircraft in unusual attitudes, they did not have the deep embodied understanding needed to recover intuitively. Aviation authorities and airlines around the world responded by increasing requirements for manual flying practice. Regulators began requiring that pilots hand-fly more portions of routine flights to maintain proficiency. Simulator training for unusual attitudes and high-altitude stalls was intensified. The lesson was not that automation is dangerous. The lesson was that the relationship between pilot and automation requires constant and careful management. Because the automation works. The numbers make this clear. The era of widespread cockpit automation has coincided with the most dramatic improvement in commercial aviation safety in history. The fatal accident rate for commercial aviation has fallen by more than 90% since the 1970s. Modern airliners managed by pilots who spend most of their time monitoring rather than manually controlling are statistically among the safest machines ever built. Automation did not cause that improvement on its own. Better aircraft design, better training, better air traffic management, better maintenance all contributed. But the removal of human error from the primary control loop for most of the flight has been a significant part of the story. The pilots in the front of your aircraft know all of this. They understand the systems they manage with a depth that goes far beyond what any passenger can observe from outside the cockpit door. They train constantly, spending hours in full-motion simulators practicing the scenarios the automation cannot handle. The double engine failures, the hydraulic losses, the unexpected wind shears on approach. The automation frees them from the routine so that they can be fully capable when the routine breaks down.